Hello again, everyone. This is the second segment of the on-site non-potable water systems rulemaking that, if adopted, will be a new chapter, Chapter 246-275 WAC. This portion of the presentation is about Part 1 of the rule. It will be an overview of the contents of Part 1. And Part 1 of the rule contains all of these rule sections. WAC 246-275-100, Purpose and Scope, through WAC 246-275-150, Inspection. So we'll begin with the purpose. The purpose of this chapter is to set standards for the use of treated non-potable water from on-site non-potable water systems to protect and improve public health and enhance the environment, conserve potable water where non-potable water can be used safely. Next, the scope really summarizes all of the topic areas. I guess you could say that the rule covers, and again, things like professional engineer requirements, the risk-based log reduction targets, the allowable source waters and uses, the implementation scales, the water quality standards, the monitoring, the reporting, the record keeping. It really just tells you about everything that this rule is going to cover. And we'll talk about all of those things as we move forward. This brings us to allowed source waters: black water, gray water, storm water, roof runoff, foundation drainage, and AC condensate are the explicitly allowed source waters under this chapter. There is also, however, an allowance for source waters that are approved under the variance procedure under Section 145, subsection 1 of this chapter, should that flexibility be needed. Other requirements come into play under that section and subsection that you should look at, of course, but the rule does provide for this flexibility. Next, we have the allowed end uses, and again, you'll see across the top there that the uses approved under the variance procedure described in that same WAC section, 145 sub 1. So the allowed end uses in this chapter are seen here: toilet and urinal flushing, priming drain traps, clothes washing, subsurface irrigation, surface non-spray irrigation, and spray irrigation of non-food plants. And then dust control and street cleaning, which could be an end use for district scale projects that have parking lots and things that may need dust control and cleaning. Next, we have the allowed implementation scales. This is meaning just the scale at which an on-site system can be used. And those include multifamily residential buildings, commercial buildings, mixed-use buildings, and then district scale projects. Again, very important that you see across the top, implementation scales approved under the variance procedure, described again in that section 145 sub 1, are also allowed. You'll want to see those sections for the specifics of those variance requirements, as well as the definitions for all of these terms. Comments and feedback on the definitions would be extremely helpful during this informal comment period, while we want to make sure that they are workable across the state with building codes and plumbing codes. So please give us your comments on those definitions. Next, we have the general administration section, and this section is different from the first preliminary draft that went out to our Rule Advisory Committee. So we have shifted now to the Department of Health shall administer and enforce and carry out the responsibilities under this chapter. We heard from the committee that local capacity would be far too strained to have an on-site non-potable water system program fully implemented at the local level. Therefore, we have placed the responsibility on the department initially. However, the department may establish a joint plan of responsibility, or what we'll call a JPR, with a local health officer or local health jurisdiction to partially or fully administer this chapter. This would mean that a local health jurisdiction could implement all or part of an on-site non-potable water system program, In addition, local health jurisdictions with JPRs with DOH may also establish joint or cooperative action agreements with other local health jurisdictions that have JPRs with DOH to share services. These shared services could benefit all cooperating local health jurisdictions to implement an on-site non-potable water system program, especially during its infancy and early years. JPRs must be updated periodically and could be updated at any time should a local health jurisdiction have changes in capacity that impact their ability to implement or partially implement an ONWS program. DOH will pursue funding opportunities to implement and administer an ONWS program at the state level. Right. Next up is the famous section 145 on variances. This section also includes waivers and extensions. So a variance can be requested for source water and end use, implementation scales, and in some cases, even sampling and reporting. Waivers are authorized in statute, and they are only for systems in operation before January 1st, 2022, and only for risk-based water quality construction standards if compliance requiring engineering, repair, or replacement is shown to be cost prohibitive. I highly recommend you go look at the statute, RCW 9046-290. This is where the waiver language is that we have built upon in the rule. In the rule, we are calling these systems unapproved legacy ONWS. Waivers for these systems are granted for 3-year duration, although reapplication is allowed and may be granted if conditions still warrant it, and user notification is required if and when a waiver is granted. Now, extensions of compliance. Now, these have a couple of purposes. The first is to address the regulatory gap that's created by the statutory waiver language and the reality that there will be systems that are in some phase of planning, designing, building, permitting, or even in operations before the rule is effective, but that don't meet that January 1st, 2022 date, but that will also need to have some mechanism for coming into compliance with the rule over a reasonable amount of time, right? We have no intention or no interest in putting these systems out of business. We want to find a path forward for them to come into compliance with the rule. So the extensions are an effort to accommodate and to capture those systems and give them a way to come into compliance, right? So we also call these systems unapproved legacy on-site systems, right? If they weren't in operation before January 1st, 2022, and they aren't eligible for a waiver, then they're only eligible for the extension, right? And so this is because the rule can't change the law. The waiver in the law allows the waivers for certain systems for certain reasons. And we build upon that idea with the intent. We build upon the idea and that intent with the extensions in order to address that regulatory gap, right? Because the rule is not getting done in the time that the statute called out. So it should be noted that there may be unapproved legacy systems that are eligible for a waiver that also need an extension for, say, something like coming into compliance with continuous monitoring requirements, right? Which wouldn't be something that you could get a waiver for, but that you could get an extension for. So some systems may need to get both an extension and a waiver, and then some systems may just be only able to get an extension, right? If they weren't in operation before January 1st, 2022, they're not eligible for a waiver because the statute says so. The second purpose of an extension of compliance is for any ONWS at any time that has trouble coming in complying with any part of the rule requirements, right? They may request an extension for a compelling cause. So this is a mechanism the agency can use to help the system come into compliance in that reasonable amount of time. If there's a compelling cause, before we would, enforce in another way via, penalties or something. So it has that dual purpose, right, of addressing that regulatory gap and also being an enforcement sort of tool that the agency can use. So this concludes the second segment of this presentation on Part 1, General Provisions. I hope it is helpful to be able to stop and start and follow along with the draft rule language. I do suspect you'll have some questions or need some clarification, so again, please look for the upcoming virtual Q&A sessions where anyone can join and ask questions about the draft rule language. Thank you again for joining us. If you have any questions in the meantime, I'm happy to answer them. Please reach out to me via email or phone. My email is Jocelyn, Jocelyn, .jones, Jones, at doh.wa.gov. My telephone number is 360-236-2030. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen to this presentation. Again, I hope the information is useful, and I do look forward to hearing back from you all in the form of comments or attendance at a forthcoming Q&A. Please stay tuned. Bye-bye. And as always, to request this document in another format, please call 1-805-525-0127. Deaf or hard of hearing customers, please call 711 for Washington Relay or email civil.rights@doh.wa.gov. Thank you again for your time and attention.